Hello everyone, how you going? And welcome to Why is Canada not part of the United States? Now I feel as though this is a fair enough question to have, considering that they were both originally British colonies that have just settled in North America, and so here we go, I'm just interested to learn.
Why Canada isn't part of America is actually an interesting tale that was on the fence until as recently as the late 19th century.
Whoa.
However, the story must begin somewhere, and first we must set the stage. In the 1750s, only 20-some years before the American Revolution, what would become Canada was split between the British Hudson's Bay Company, Newfoundland, Labrador, Nova Scotia, and the majority being part of New France.
Oh, I always just forget what a stupid amount of land that those guys had. I mean, I guess at the same time, the Hudson Bay Company also just had a lot of land. I'm not entirely sure what that purple little bit is, and because they had Labrador and then, I forget what that bottom bit is, but then just having Newfoundland as well as I guess I'm fairly sure someone was saying in the comments is all of the area that drained into the Hudson Bay was kind of determined what it was going to be before they even knew how big their bloody country was. And then it seems as they got further and further towards Alaska, they just went, damn, this is just too damn cold. Everything's freezing. The rivers, I just can't even tell it anymore. But no, in saying that, I am curious as to where kind of Upper Canada and the Lower Canada area was, because I've heard of that before, and at least I know what they're talking about. I have the context about what the company is, and so at least every single video I watch just fills in a little bit more of the puzzle. But no, either way, just the New France area is just insane. Like, honestly, it's nearly half the world at that point.
What did America look like? Well, as we know, there were 13 colonies spanning from Maine down to the East Coast to the border with New Spain and Florida. Most of the
New Spain? I've never heard of this. I'm missing a lot of history in terms of North America in that regard then. Okay, well, I guess I've got some catching up to do, and hopefully they fill me in.
What did America look like? Well, as we know, there were 13 colonies spanning from Maine down to the East Coast to the border with New Spain and Florida. Most of the population was between Massachusetts and Virginia. There was actually quite a bit of uncolonized land separating these colonists from the English speakers, hiding up in what would become Canada, meaning that there was less of a shared identity between them. In 1760, after the famous 7 Years' War, or to the Americans the French Indian War, much of that French territory that would become Canada was handed over to the British.
Oh, see, once again, I mean, maybe he's about to explain it, but I really don't know in terms of, he said it was a famous war, but I really don't know what the famous 7-Year War is. I mean, I don't even feel like I've even heard the name of it, or maybe I have heard of the 7-Year War. What else did he call it? The French Indian War?
Or to the Americans, the French Indian War.
Yeah, the French Indian War. I can't say I've ever heard of either of them, and so I guess it was a 7-year-long war between the French and the Indians, being the Native Americans, I can only imagine. But to be honest, the thing that stands out to me the most is just how many wars were there within this 200-year time period. The only real one that I ever knew about was, I guess, the War of Independence, or is that what I'm thinking of? Between, I guess, like the Redcoats and the Bluecoats in terms of that entire thing. That's the only real war I ever really know of. And so to hear that there are a smattering of other wars just kind of littered throughout history in the same area, it really was a treacherous time and place to be.
Much of that French territory that would become Canada was handed over to the British.
Why though?
Some of the French colonial elite left, but most were actually content to work under British rule as long as they could speak French and stay Catholic.
Is that where Quebec comes into it? Oh, here we go. The puzzle is filling in, like I said.
Though if you are Quebecois, you actually would see this as the beginning of Anglo rule over the French Canadians.
Oh, well, that explains where the French comes into the entirety of Canada, because I never really understood why was there such a large proportion. And then I guess also, if I'm able to find it, this map, where is it? I guess if you actually kind of look at it, this is where Quebec is up in here, where this blue is, and so it makes sense that the kind of the most extended blue in terms of the New France is what they were calling it, would then lead into being Quebec just later on, once you actually just, I guess, living under British rule as a French speaker, or a French elite is even stranger to me. I mean, it does feel as though there's a little bit of information missing in terms of how that entire thing went down. How did the British just all of a sudden have it kind of handed back over to them? I'd like to know that, but yeah, finally I just understand where Quebec and France comes into it.
The British made an agreement with the French Canadians in 1774 called the Quebec Act. This allowed civil code and common law to exist side by side. It entrenched the semi-feudal French seigneurial system, and it legalized the Catholic tithe to Catholics in Quebec. Importantly for this story, however, is that a lot of land previously allocated to Native Americans was then shifted to Quebec in an effort to streamline moving furs out of the St. Lawrence River.
That entire thing just sounds like an absolute nightmare, both politically and kind of environmentally, and just in terms of taking land off the Native Americans. I mean, it was 1774, and so I can't exactly say that they were the forefront of people's minds, but then I don't even know what civil code and common law mean, and even the one I can't pronounce system, Catholic tithe is what he said. Man, honestly have never heard of anything that is on that little piece of paper there, and it sounds, who was it signed by? George Washington? No, George, I don't even know who that would be. George someone. I mean, overall it sounded as though it was just to kind of keep a little bit more peace within both the French speaking and the French colony and the British colony, but man, I'm sure it screwed someone over being the Native Americans, and also just sounds like a nightmare to deal with. Especially then in modern times when you're trying to kind of roll back these laws that have been in place since 1774, and oh man, don't envy anyone that has to deal with that.
The American colonists, who long desired to expand themselves into this territory, got pretty mad about it. If you know a bit of the history of the American Revolution, the Quebec Act is one of the, quote, insufferable acts that in part triggered the American Revolution. What this means, though, is that Quebec, the largest colony in modern Canada at the time, was Catholic and largely did not speak English. After the 7 Years' War, many Americans even considered them rivals or enemies, and not part of this growing American identity. Wow. That being said, during the American War of Independence, and before he defected to the British, Benedict Arnold did try to take Quebec. The Americans took Montreal and tried to siege Quebec City. Then spring came and they gave up on the endeavor.
Wait, what? Why was that of all things spring the thing that just stopped them in their tracks? I mean, maybe was it like World War II in a bit of a reverse situation where they just didn't get frozen out? I mean, like I said, it is a very turbulent place to be living, considering the Americans came up to try and take Quebec, or I guess part of Canada. I guess it's not really Canada yet, is it? And I'm fairly sure that he said Montreal.
They did try to take Quebec. The Americans took Montreal.
Yeah, the Americans took Montreal, and then they tried to just continue on their way after that, but they just got stopped by spring. I feel as though that's the worst excuse I've ever heard for a war or a kind of an invasion ending ever. But no, bringing it back further, it's interesting what he said here about them basically, apparently, supposedly being the reason for the American Revolution.
The Quebec Act is one of the, quote, insufferable acts.
I like to call it an insufferable act. That's a hell of a statement to make, considering it was just kind of a treaty, from what I gathered, and then all of a sudden it's affecting an entirely separate country. I have no idea. It sounded like a lot of people weren't too happy about it just for a couple of pelts or some things like that. I mean, I know it's another trade route and there's a lot of money involved, but come on, everyone's just moving into a new place. You've kicked out the old native residents and that's just mean enough as is, and now you're just trying to even take more land. Like, doesn't anyone look at a map and go, oh, actually, where, if I can find a map, for goodness sake, where is a map? I just can't find a single map. This entire thing, no map, really? Here we go, finally, you've already got this massive chunk of land, even though I guess Spain was down below, but you've already got literally, virtually all of the USA, and then you just want all of Canada as well? Come on, people, just lay off the entire thing.
Then spring came and they gave up on the endeavor. The Americans allied with France during the war, but neither ally wanted to see the other take Quebec, so the issue was largely dropped.
Wait, hang on a second, I thought the French had Quebec. Well, now I'm even more confused. Did the French not have Quebec and then they're trying to steal it from someone else?
Spring came and they gave up on the endeavor. The Americans allied with France during the war, but neither ally wanted to see the other take Quebec, so the issue was largely dropped.
I'm so confused, man. This is just opening up a million doors in terms of just my knowledge base, or the holes in my knowledge base. Man, I gotta fill it in more. I mean, to be honest, my war history isn't exactly up to scratch, and especially not a North American war history. Man, there's just too many things to keep up with this entire sector of the world. And so I guess in a selfish way, I can definitely understand why people would be wanting it, but really, I just don't understand the constant warring and tug-of-warring as well between the entire thing, when I just originally thought the French owned Quebec from the start, and so now I'm even more confused.
The war effort to put down the revolution actually brought a lot of money into Canada, and the tariff protections the New Englanders gave up to fight the war were quite good for the Canadian economy as well. Business.
What? There is just so many things going on with this entire thing, I just cannot even begin to keep up. Because one second they're talking about how the French sided with America to help them take Quebec, but then they didn't want each other to take it, so then it was dropped, and that's just after directly talking about how a British soldier, or no, a British, I don't even know who he is, they didn't even tell me, but a British guy then, he wasn't even British. Like, that's the thing, there's so much information just going everywhere, all over the place. This guy, I can only imagine, was American, defected to be British, and so they go from the British to then talking about France and the USA, and then all of a sudden talking about Canada's economy. Like, man, keep just one story going at a time, please, for my brain cells' sake.
The war effort to put down the revolution actually brought a lot of money into Canada, and the tariff protections the New Englanders gave up to fight the war were quite good for the Canadian economy as well.
Sure.
Business, especially the fur business, was booming with the 13 colonies in rebellion. They saw that their economic future relied on protection and integration into the British mercantile empire, and so felt no desire to leave it. Lastly, I must mention that Canada then saw an influx of refugees after the American Revolution.
From where?
These refugees were mostly the Loyalists who did not want to stay in the United States.
Oh, okay. I thought they were talking about the USA still, so I was a little bit confused from where, but they're talking about Canada now. See, because they were just talking about the 13 colonies and then fur trade, so I assumed that they were talking about how America was involved, and then all of a sudden they're talking about the British in terms of protection, and then all of a time they're just talking about Canada. Like, it's just insane. I mean, once you actually just know what's going on, it's a little bit easier to keep track of who's going where. I can understand that, but you just have to have so much more knowledge to be able to keep up with this bloody bugger. But no, I've certainly heard it before that there was a whole bundle of people. Yes, there was a whole bundle of people that wanted independence, and that's what the entire war was about, but the other side went, actually, I want to stay with the British Empire, and yes, we want their protection, and I like more their values, or whatever you want to call it. And Canada was just able to provide that refuge for so many people that just wanted that lifestyle, if you'd even call it that. I honestly don't know how much they differed, but if that's what they wanted, that's what they wanted, and so yeah, it would have been good for Canada in terms of a population growth sense.
These refugees were mostly the Loyalists who did not want to stay in the United States. You can imagine they brought a lot of British patriotism with them. Canada then soon grew into its own colony, with its own identity. They banned slavery pretty early on, and had a lot of friction with the US over their position as the end of the Underground Railroad.
Wait, the end of the Underground Railroad? I don't exactly know what that's talking about. Oh, actually, no, I saw a Heritage Minute on it. Oh, okay. And so I guess based off what he just said and the Heritage Minute that I've watched, it must mean that Canada banned slavery way earlier than the USA did. So I guess a lot of people were just kind of migrating and finding refuge and seeking refuge up in Canada. But no, I want to see again because the flags changed over. I don't know if that was the original. It started out with the British flag and then it goes to this other one. Here we go. Where is it? There we go. That one right there. Now, I'm not entirely sure what that is. Is that meant to be, obviously the Union Jack is still on it, but I don't really know what it represents in total because it looks like there's 5 little parts of that entire shield or emblem. And then, of course, you just go to this one, which is just such a well-known flag. It's so symbolic in so many ways. You just go, yes, that is a Canadian flag. I just know that maple leaf off by heart. You can tell it a mile away.
They quickly established distinct and different identities. Many Canadians today speculate that in many ways, our culture is defined by how not America we can be. One quick footnote, the US did try to conquer Canada once. Among a series of other issues...
Wait, didn't we already hear that they just were stopped by spring? Is that what he's talking about? Or was it something else that they actually tried again after Canada was kind of formed as a Canada instead of just Upper and Northern and Quebec and whatever you want to call it? But no, I just do love this entire thing. Our culture is defined about how not American we can be. I guess that probably just kind of stems from the original roots of why people, or so many people, were migrating up there. Where is it? These people, just the original loyalists, he called them, that just wanted to keep that crown, heritage, or whatever you want to say it is. And even though as a demographic of people, there aren't too many other countries that compare to be that similar. I guess Australia and New Zealand and Canada and the USA, but either way, I just love the fact that he said
Many
this.
Canadians today speculate that in many ways, our culture is defined by how not America we can be.
Just how not America, which must be so difficult because people have said in the comments, they're just such a powerhouse in terms of media and exports and all these things, GDP, just absolutely mega country. And so it really just does require a mammoth effort to just be able to kind of fight that back and go, no, we're not like you, we're connected to you, we share a lot of things, but realistically we just don't want to be you. That's why we're a separate country in the first place.
Among a series of other issues, the British Empire found itself rather distracted by the war with Napoleon, and the US smelled opportunity. They used a rhetoric of manifest destiny, claiming that Canada was theirs by right.
What?
It didn't help that the British were flat out capturing American soldiers into the Royal Navy and secretly giving weapons to Native American groups resisting US expansion.
Whoa, okay then. See, it's just constantly more turbulent. It just evolves and evolves and evolves. There was just so much happened in that last 10 seconds that it's hard to keep up. So America tried to invade because Canada was fighting the French in terms of the Napoleon War, and then so they just smelt blood in the water and just came after the fact that their resources were thin. Like, man, that is some serious kind of backstabbery. All of a sudden, like, yeah, we know they're fighting these guys. Let's just kind of jump on their back and see if we can just grab them while they're down. But that wasn't enough to just add to the entire fuel to the fire. No, the British then had to go and, where was it, just steal people from the US Navy? Let alone the fact that they just kind of said, oh, based on whatever he said, the rhetoric, it was just basically our country to begin with. Like, what is going on in these people's minds? Everyone just wants to claim and hold every piece they can. They're so selfish.
Claiming that Canada was theirs by right. It didn't help that the British were flat out capturing American soldiers into the Royal Navy and secretly giving weapons to Native American groups resisting US expansion. In 1812, the US invaded Canada, and after a number of attempts was pushed back by Canadian militias and blockaded by British fleets.
Damn, okay, so the British fleets came and got involved as well. I mean, I guess at that point it was still related to the British Empire, probably, in the same way that it is now. But I think the thing that stood out to me the most is just the fact that they were secretly giving weapons to the Native Americans, and I'm fairly sure that's what I just saw in the last Heritage Minutes, where 80 of them were able to hold off the USA invading, and so I think that is now the context around the entire thing. I had no idea what that entire Heritage Minute was about in terms of a time period in history, and now I just go, oh, okay, if that is actually the same thing, it makes sense as to why they just were kind of where they got their weapons and all those kind of things.
It resulted in a Canadian deployment pushing all the way down to Washington, D.C.
Wow.
The peace treaty ended the idea of Canada being Americans in waiting basically for the last 200 plus years. That being said,
Americans in waiting? That just absolutely seems to sum up their entire idea of what Canada was to them. They're just like, it's basically ours, all your people should be us anyway, and so just give it to us, come to us, we'll just kind of take everyone you can, no worries, oh, it's actually meant to be ours because of the rhetoric or whatever it was, and then they just finally went, no, just stop doing that, we're separate, go away.
That being said, I do not think that two countries are as close as Canada and the United States. We maintain the world's largest undefended border, are each other's largest trading partners, and have a pretty long history of peace and prosperity between us. Also, we gave the US most of its best musicians and comedians.
Oh,
you're welcome.
Just sneaky in a little bit of a backstab at the end there, just going, well, you know what, you guys have your fair share, but we also just add our own little just spice on top. I mean, I do love the fact that this video was animated with Australia and New Zealand having a big question mark about what he just said, but it's fair enough. As we've said a million times, both countries are very, very similar. Even all four countries are very, very similar, but just between the two pairings, they're very, very similar. I mean, I'm fairly sure that New Zealand isn't Australia's biggest trading partner, and so Canada and the USA even have that on top of us. But considering the fact that Australia and New Zealand's population combined isn't even Canada, and then the USA is 10 times Canada, it's just the scales here are just completely different. And so even though this was just a very in-depth video where some of the parts I was just completely lost, and I'm sure I'm going to learn just a little bit more watching it again just when I'm editing or whatever, either way, there is no denying that both countries, the USA and Canada, are very close, very closely related in terms of just a history, even though they've kind of had a little bit of bickering and fighting throughout history. Both countries are very similar in a whole smattering of ways, even down to the fact that they're kind of patriotic, but just go about it in different ways. The USA is very patriotic to itself, and then I feel as though Canada is just very patriotic in terms of just keeping everyone else out, just trying to keep its own identity, having the French kind of speaking aspect of the entire thing, and then the British colony, and there are so many different aspects just moving into Canada that it really does just create this very unique mosaic of people, just demographics and everything in between. So even though, like I said, it sounded like it was a very turbulent place to be just a couple of 100 years ago, either way, I feel as though either country you pick, you're just going to be having a pretty good time in the modern times. But anyway, in saying that, I reckon I'm going to call it there. So thank you for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, feel free to do the YouTube algorithmic things down below. Also, if this is the first video of mine that you're watching, then make sure to check out just any other massive range of videos that I've got, be Heritage Minutes, Canadian videos, international videos, you name it, I've got it. Also, make sure to check out the original video down in the description below, or hey, maybe even just want to consider subscribing so that you don't miss another one of these in the future. But all in all, have a good one and see ya.